Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Nelson A. Denis. He is a former New York State Assemblyman. He is the author of War Against All Puerto Ricans, Revolution and Terror in America's Colony, and writing in the New York Times the opinion piece just yesterday, I guess it was, The Law Strangling Puerto Rico. And Nelson, that law has, as of this morning, been waived, at least temporarily, by the Trump administration.
Yeah, there's an irony to this. The law was promulgated in 1920. It's Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. It's otherwise known as the Jones Act, and was originally to protect shipping lanes and the coastal areas and boats from German U-2 boats. That was the original legislative intent. And you fast forward 98 years. It took 98 years to revisit this law, which at this point, all it's really doing is strangling the Puerto Rican economy. It literally took a hurricane and very quick editorial pressure to bring attention to this law.
So now my understanding is the law also was a part of the function of the law was to protect the American maritime industry, and with the because there was concern that if we needed to ramp up to have this capacity to build ships and whatnot, that we would want an American industry so that we wouldn't have to rely on others. The industry has sort of withered to a certain extent, but all of this, despite any, and certainly some unions, I think, still support this law because it provides jobs. But no matter how you slice it, what's happening to Puerto Rico under this law, it appears to me to not be necessary to have Puerto Rico in this. We have Virgin Islands are not subject to this law. Am I right?
Yeah, there's three territories: Virgin Islands, Guam, and I believe Samoa are exempt from the Jones Act. Let me take out very quickly. The way it applies to Puerto Rico is that Puerto Rico is an island. It has to import virtually everything, including oil, which runs its entire electrical grid. And Puerto Rico is in a blackout right now, so this is critical. It imports 85% of its food, clothing, automobiles, all of it under the auspices of the Jones Act. And the way that works is that any foreign registry vessel that attempts to go to Puerto Rico, it can only do it in one of two ways. If it goes directly to Puerto Rico, it is subject to fees, taxes, duties, quota restrictions. All these costs are factored into the product, and the net result is it ends up costing about 20% more. Everything, no matter if it's medicine from Canada, oil from Venezuela, a car from Germany, anything. The option is it can go to Jacksonville, Florida, specifically Jacksonville, where it gets offloaded off the original foreign registry vessel, reloaded onto an American boat, and then it reroutes to Puerto Rico. And that's the equivalent of digging a ditch to fill it up again. There's no reason other than that, other than, it, as you said, it creates jobs in Jacksonville, and again, it ramps up the price of the product. Then the final result of this is that it allows U.S. consumer goods companies to ramp up their cost, their price in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Ricans are very price sensitive. Their per capita income is about $17,000, which is less than half that of Mississippi, the poorest state in the union. So they're very price sensitive. So if Puerto Ricans can save a little bit on some product, they will. So U.S. corporations just slightly underbid the foreign goods with the price protection that's provided from the Jones Act. And it creates this tremendous captive market in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the fifth largest market in the world for goods, and there's more Walgreens and Walmarts per square mile in Puerto Rico than anywhere else on the planet. And all these goods are being sold at hyperinflated prices due to the Jones Act.
I want to reiterate that I was just blown away by that. The fifth largest market in the world for American products?
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's relative. It's not a huge population. It's 3.5 million people,
right.
And they're poor, and it's the fifth largest market.
And I mean, you know, when you look at those numbers, and this is, you know, I mean, I think this is the larger story that you tell in your book, and people can go back and listen to our interview when we talked about your book specifically. But when you hear those numbers, it really has the feeling of you get the sense of colonialism that's involved in this. And instead of like extracting, and we still very well may, resources from Puerto Rico, we're extracting, or I should say, we're extracting sort of like final end resource. It's not even natural resource. We're extracting it's just a full extraction of wealth out of that country, that the island, I should say. It's the United States territory, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, and you know what? You actually covered. There's a real insight in there, Sam. That there's been an evolution. It's been a one-sided relationship, and there's been a red carpet stretching from San Juan to Wall Street for over 100 years. From the beginning, it was perceived Puerto Rico as the advantage of it was to be a naval coaling station. It had geopolitical value back in the turn of the century, in 1898. They quickly saw, though, that there was an agricultural benefit in Puerto Rico. And an interesting context is here, an even larger hurricane occurred in 99 called Huracán San Ciriaco. San Ciriaco really leveled the island. And the American response in the following year was to devalue the currency of Puerto Rico by 40%. So it was a sort of a Naomi Klein shock doctrine response. And that evolution has continued. It went from a naval coaling station to an agricultural economy, a one-crop cash cow economy, that of sugar, and they were able to. The United States was able to own 80% of the arable land in Puerto Rico. That price devaluation, the monetary devaluation, helped them do it. Then, from an agricultural economy, it became a corporate tax haven. Whereby corporations get a 20-year tax abatement on all interest and capital gains income. And then most recently, it's become a municipal bond target and a consumer goods market. And so it's gone through all of these evolutionary relations with the United States, but all of them one-sided, where it always benefits the United States.
And we should remind people that even with all this said, in Puerto Rico, you can't vote for the president. How does that... I didn't realize that. You can vote in primaries, but how do you vote? I don't understand. I mean, if I'm living in Puerto Rico and I move to Florida, I can vote in Florida. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, that derives from the relationship from the beginning, from 1898 and from the Spanish-American War onward. Puerto Rico has been an occupied territory. It has been a territorial possession, and those are key words. They're so key that they were upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court last year in the United States versus Sanchez Valle decision. That and another. There were two Supreme Court cases, both of which upheld last year that Puerto Rico was not a commonwealth or any. They stripped down to the language that under the meaning of the territorial and the supremacy clauses of the U.S. Constitution, Puerto Rico is a possession, and that's synonymous with a colony. And as a possession, the U.S. Congress has plenary jurisdiction over any law in Puerto Rico. They can veto anything that Puerto Rican legislature comes up with, including most recently, and this was the controversy last year that rose to the Supreme Court, the attempt to give Puerto Rico Chapter 9 bankruptcy powers. It doesn't have it. Puerto Rico can't create its own legislation, and if it does, and if it conflicts with U.S. legislation, it'll always be struck down. So it's sort of it's a very qualified citizenship whereby we don't get the real privileges and immunities of the U.S. Constitution, and yet we're subject to U.S. law. We can get drafted, and we're subject to things like the Jones Act, which are almost it's surrealistic. U.S. taxpayer doesn't realize. They think that Puerto Ricans are getting tax preferences, that they don't pay full income taxes, and that they're basically getting over. And it's not the case. It's the exact opposite. Puerto Rico has been sustaining the U.S. economy since the inception. And one of the principal ways, Sam, is this Jones Act. It's costing Puerto Rico it's estimated between $3 and $6 billion a year, that Jones Act alone. If it weren't for that one law, we would have paid the public debt of $73 billion. We would have paid it 3 or 4 times over. That gives you an idea of the power of the U.S. Congress over Puerto Rico.
Just go walk through that. I mean, explain it. I mean, because you've got just everything is so it it sort of traps the economy in some way, right? I mean, and this is why you've had such a large exodus of people from Puerto Rico over the past, I guess, decade. I mean, just explain where, so you have to, as a consumer, you're paying 13% more in terms of your cost of living. Something like, I saw some thing that said, food itself costs almost twice what it costs in Florida. So this is just basic, and then this money is extracted by U.S. corporations, I guess, and none of it stays in Puerto Rico. So the economy, the economy there is just drained of money that could go towards infrastructure payments and whatnot.
Yeah, and so what happens is, unfortunately, Puerto Rico and President Trump sort of touched on this. He mentioned the fact that Puerto Rico is 1,500 miles away, and you can't just drive trucks over there. And he's right. But that 1,500 miles has also created 1,500 miles of misunderstanding. And in all fairness to the rest of the American public, there's no reason why they should understand the minutiae of the Jones Act. It's not part of the fabric of their daily life. And so that's a big problem. That what you hear, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Puerto Rico never happens at all. The only reason we had some meaningful attention to the Jones Act is because of the hurricane. And yet this law has been on the books for the last 98 years. And you're right, it absolutely drains the Puerto Rican economy, and it prevents Puerto Rico from having a private sector. The island is specifically prohibited from developing its own shipping industry, which is a fundamental aspect of an island.
Right.
You mean you have to import and export. Well, Puerto Rico can't set its own international pricing structure. It's completely subject to whatever price rigging is created by the U.S. corporations. And in the end, it becomes a class thing. It's not as if it's Puerto Rico versus the United States or the people in Puerto Rico. It's a class situation because there are a very small segment of rich people in Wall Street, in San Juan, Puerto Ricans included, that are creating these financial instruments, these municipal bond products, and that are benefiting from the Jones Act at the expense of not only Puerto Ricans, but the U.S. taxpayer. Because they're the ones that are paying taxes that go in as transfer payments into Puerto Rico, but the Puerto Ricans don't benefit because their per capita income is only $17,000, and whatever money they're getting at any tax purposes is going from one pocket out the other to the corporations.
Right.
When the same car costs $6,000 more in San Juan than it does in Miami, Sam, someone is getting over, and it's not the Puerto Ricans.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos